I woke up to the sound of laughter, splashing water, and the unmistakable scent of chlorine drifting through my open window. At first, I thought I was dreaming. Maybe one of those memories of summers long past, when my grandkids would visit and turn the backyard into their own personal playground. But no, this was real, and it was coming from the far end of my property. My property. I grabbed my robe, slipped into my old house slippers, and made my way outside, my morning coffee forgotten on the counter. The moment I stepped off my porch, I froze. Right there where my vegetable garden used to be was a massive, fully built swimming pool, complete with lounge chairs, a lifeguard stand, and at least a dozen people sunbathing like they were on a resort vacation. A group of kids were diving in from the deep end, their delighted shrieks cutting through the morning air. I stared, my brain struggling to piece together what I was seeing. My land, my garden, gone. In its place, this. "Morning, Mr. Whitaker," called out a woman reclining in a pool chair, sunglasses perched on her nose. I recognized her. Nancy McBride, the vice president of the Evergreen Pines HOA. She waved casually, as if she weren't currently trespassing on my property, as if her ridiculous homeowners association hadn't just claimed my land like some medieval kingdom expanding its borders. I forced myself to breathe, my jaw tightening. "What the hell is this?" I said, my voice sharp but calm. Nancy just smiled, lowering her sunglasses to look at me. "Oh, this." She gestured lazily around. "It's the new community pool. Isn't it fabulous? The board approved the plans months ago, and we finished construction last week. We figured you'd appreciate the upgrade to your lot. The whole neighborhood is loving it. My lot, my land, my patience rapidly thinning. Get off my property," I said, my voice steady but firm. Nancy sighed dramatically, standing up and smoothing out her ridiculous floral cover-up. Now, Mr. Whitaker, there's no need to be so dramatic. The HOA had every right to develop this land under our Community Enhancement Initiative. It's all in the bylaws." I narrow my eyes. "I'm not part of your HOA, Nancy." She let out a forced laugh. "Well, technically that's true. But since your property borders the community, and since it's been deemed an underutilized space, we made a decision to extend our recreational facilities for the good of everyone. You wouldn't want to be the kind of neighbor who denies kids a safe place to swim, would you?" I looked past her at the pool packed with strangers, at the lifeguard, who I could only assume was hired with HOA funds, at the people setting up coolers and beach towels like this was a public park. My property taxes weren't paying for this. My permission hadn't been granted for this. My land had been taken, and Nancy was standing there, acting like she'd done me a favor. "Pack it up," I said, turning on my heel. "You've got until sundown." Nancy gasped, as if I'd just insulted her entire family lineage. "Mr. Whitaker, you really should be more neighborly." The board had a lengthy discussion about this, and I assure you, it was voted on fair and square. You'll be happy to know we even named it Whitaker Community Pool in your honor. I stopped walking and turned back slowly. "You named it after me?" She grinned. "We thought it was a nice touch. A tribute to the land, you know?" I let out a low chuckle, shaking my head. "You know what, Nancy? You're right. I should be more neighborly. In fact, I think I'll embrace this change." Her smug expression faltered for just a second before she recovered. "See? I knew you'd come around. The HOA is always looking out for the community." I nodded. "Of course. And if it's a community pool, then that means you won't mind if I start charging for memberships, right?" Nancy blinked, tilting her head. "Excuse me?" I crossed my arms, feeling a slow, satisfied smile creep onto my face. "Well, since it's on my land, I'll be managing the operations from here on out. Looks like I'm in the swimming pool business now. $500 per family, per season. And for anyone who doesn't pay, no entry." Her face paled. "That's ridiculous. The HOA already paid for everything." I shrugged. "Then you can take it all back. Fill it in. Tear it down. I don't care. But if it stays, it's mine to run. That means I'll be setting the rules, and I'll be the one profiting off my own land." Nancy sputtered, glancing back at the pool, where oblivious swimmers were still enjoying their day. You can't do that." I smirked. "I think you'll find I can." And just like that, the game had changed. They thought they could take from me? Well, Let's see how they liked it when they had to pay the price. Nancy's face turned a deep shade of red as she stormed away, pulling out her phone, no doubt calling an emergency HOA meeting. I didn't care. They had built that pool on my land without permission, without payment, and without even a conversation. Now, they would learn what happens when you take something that doesn't belong to you. I spent the rest of the day making plans. If they wanted to use my property, they would have to follow my rules. First, I went inside and pulled out the old paperwork for my land. It had been in my family for generations, long before this neighborhood was even a thought. The HOA had no legal claim over it, and I had never signed a single document agreeing to be part of their ridiculous organization. They had zero authority over me. That meant I could do whatever I wanted. The pool was mine, whether they liked it or not. By the time evening rolled around, I was ready. I grabbed some plywood and spray paint from my garage and made a large sign. Whitaker's Private Swim Club. Membership required in bold red letters. I hammered it into the ground right in front of the pool entrance, making sure it was the first thing anyone saw when they arrived. Then, I set up a small folding table with a chair next to it and printed out a stack of membership applications with my new prices, $500 per family, per season. No exceptions. The next morning, the HOA members arrived in full force. Nancy was leading the charge, flanked by a group of board members dressed like they were heading into a courtroom battle. They stopped in their tracks when they saw my sign, their mouths dropping open. People were already lining up, asking about memberships, and a few smart ones had already handed me cash to secure their access before the HOA could interfere. It was a beautiful sight. Nancy pushed through the crowd and slammed her hands on my table. She was fuming, her fake friendly smile gone. She demanded that I take the sign down immediately and allow free access to all HOA members. I leaned back in my chair, sipping my coffee, and reminded her that this was my land. If they wanted the pool, they had to follow my rules. She pulled out a stack of paperwork, claiming the HOA had allocated funds for the pool's maintenance, which meant it was community property. I laughed and told her that spending money on stolen land didn't make it theirs. If anything, they owed me rent. While she argued, more people kept arriving, some confused, some angry, and some completely thrilled at the idea of a private membership pool. A few neighbors whispered among themselves, realizing they had been tricked by the HOA into thinking this was a free amenity when, in reality, it had been built without permission. Some even pulled out their wallets, deciding they'd rather pay me than deal with HOA nonsense. Nancy was seething. She threatened legal action, claiming I was extorting the community. I told her to go right ahead. If she wanted to take this to court, she would have to explain why the HOA spent thousands of dollars on a pool built on land they didn't own. That shut her up real fast. She turned on her heel and marched away, swearing that this wasn't over. By the afternoon, I had collected a hefty sum from eager families who were more than happy to escape the HOA's grip. I hired a local teenager to act as a lifeguard and another to run a small snack stand. I even ordered lounge chairs and umbrellas online to make the place look more professional. If I was going to run this, I was going to do it right. A few days later, HOA members tried sneaking in, claiming they were entitled to free access. I stood my ground and denied entry to anyone who hadn't paid. Word spread quickly that I wasn't bluffing. That's when the HOA got desperate. They sent out an official HOA email warning residents that using my pool was a violation of neighborhood rules and that members caught participating in unauthorized activities would be fined. It was laughable. They were trying to scare people, but it backfired. People were fed up with their rules and fines. They saw me as the guy standing up to the HOA, and that made them even more eager to support my swim club. Then came the sabotage. One night, I heard splashing and laughter at the pool after hours. I walked outside and caught Nancy and a group of HOA board members sneaking in, trying to enjoy the pool without paying. I turned on my flashlight and watched them freeze like deer in headlights. They tried to make excuses, claiming they were just checking for safety violations. I told them I'd be installing security cameras in the morning and that next time, I'd call the police for trespassing. The next day, I made sure to put up a no trespassing private property sign along with cameras to keep an eye on things. Nancy wasn't done. The HOA suddenly tried fining me for unauthorized business activity, claiming that running a private pool club in a residential neighborhood was against zoning laws. But I'd already done my homework. I wasn't technically running a business. I was simply charging an access fee for people to enter my personal property, which was completely legal. I even had a local lawyer confirm it. When Nancy tried to escalate things, I filed an official complaint against the HOA for unauthorized land development, citing that they had built on my property without a permit. That was the final blow. The HOA board started crumbling under the pressure. Residents who had paid them fees for years were demanding answers. Where had the money gone? Why had they built a pool without checking the land ownership? People wanted refunds, and some even started questioning why they were paying HOA fees at all. Nancy tried one last desperate move. She called a mandatory HOA meeting and demanded that I shut down my pool immediately or face legal consequences. I showed up to the meeting, sat in the front row, and waited for her to finish her dramatic speech. When she finally pointed at me, demanding I comply, I pulled out a thick file of legal documents, complaints, and proof of trespassing. Then, I made an announcement of my own. I had filed a lawsuit against the HOA for illegally seizing my land and was seeking compensation for damages. The room fell silent. The HOA had spent thousands of dollars on a pool they now had no control over. They had tried to push me out, but I had turned their own game against them. Now, they were cornered, and for the first time in years, they weren't the ones holding the power. As I walked out of that meeting, I saw Nancy slump into her chair, defeated. The board members whispered among themselves, knowing that they had lost. My pool was staying, and there was nothing they could do about it. As I walked out of that HOA meeting, I knew the battle wasn't over yet. People like Nancy and the rest of the HOA board didn't just give up. They had spent years running the neighborhood like a dictatorship, fining people for the smallest things, banning harmless decorations, and now trying to steal land for their own projects. They weren't going to let this go without a fight. But the difference now was that they had lost their power. Residents had seen the truth, and their once loyal followers were turning against them. I had more support than ever, and they had nothing left but empty threats. The next morning, I got up early, grabbed my coffee, and walked to the pool. It had become more than just a way to get back at the HOA. It was actually something I enjoyed. Families who had been afraid to stand up to the HOA before now felt comfortable gathering at the pool, laughing and enjoying their time without worrying about fines or ridiculous rules. I had set up picnic tables, some umbrellas, and even a grill area where people could cook. It was turning into a real community spot, but unlike the HOA, I wasn't forcing anyone to pay unless they wanted access. Some people brought baked goods or snacks instead of money, and I welcomed it. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about proving a point. By noon, I noticed something strange. A city worker was walking around near my fence, taking notes on a clipboard. I walked over and asked what was going on, and he hesitated before answering. He told me he was here to inspect for zoning violations after receiving a formal complaint. I didn't even need to ask who filed it. It was obvious. Nancy and the HOA were trying to find another way to shut me down. I let the guy do his inspection, knowing full well that everything was legal. After about an hour of looking around and taking pictures, he walked up to me, looking almost embarrassed. He admitted that nothing was wrong and that as long as I wasn't running an official business with employees, there was nothing the city could do. I thanked him and even offered him a soda before he left. Later that afternoon, I received an official-looking letter in my mailbox. It was another threat from the HOA, this time claiming that the unauthorized pool structure needed to be demolished immediately for safety reasons. I laughed so hard I nearly dropped the letter. They had built it themselves, on my land, and now they wanted me to take it down? I decided to have a little fun with them. I wrote a response letter stating that if the HOA believed the pool was unsafe, they needed to provide a full demolition plan, cover all costs, and personally apologize to every resident who had paid into it. Then, I made several copies and taped them all around the neighborhood. The reaction was priceless. Residents were furious. People who had blindly followed the HOA started questioning everything. If the HOA had used their money to build the pool, why were they now trying to destroy it? Some even called emergency HOA meetings to demand answers. It was chaos, and for once, I wasn't the one in trouble. They were. That night, I checked my security cameras and saw something interesting. Nancy and a few other HOA board members were sneaking around the pool area with flashlights. I watched as they inspected the fences, looked under chairs, and even checked the water. It didn't take long to figure out what they were doing. They were searching for something, anything they could use against me. Maybe a loose bolt, a small crack, or anything they could call a violation. But they found nothing. My pool was in perfect condition, and they had no excuse to take it down. The next day, I decided to take things a step further. I printed up real membership card for the pool, complete with official-looking designs and even a barcode scanner app one downloaded on my phone. If they wanted to play games, I'd play along. I made a grand announcement that from now on, members would get exclusive early access, free drinks on Saturdays, and a VIP area with better chairs. It was all nonsense, of course, but the HOA didn't know that. When they saw people excitedly signing up and flashing their new membership cards, it drove them crazy. By the end of the week, the HOA was completely falling apart. Board members were quitting, residents were openly defying Nancy's rules, and fines were being ignored. The once powerful HOA was now a joke, and the best part was that I hadn't even had to do anything illegal. I had simply turned their own tactics against them. Then, the final blow came. One evening, a reporter from a local news station showed up at my doorstep. Apparently, word had gotten out about the HOA's illegal land grab, and now the media wanted a story. I welcomed them in, showed them all the paperwork, the legal documents proving the land was mine, and even let them interview some residents who had been bullied by the HOA for years. When the segment aired on TV, it was an instant disaster for Nancy and her crew. Viewers flooded the HOA office with angry calls, demanding answers. The city even got involved, launching an official investigation into their finances. Within days, the HOA collapsed completely. Nancy resigned in disgrace, and the remaining board members quickly followed. The HOA was officially disbanded, and the neighborhood was finally free. No more ridiculous rules, no more fines, and no more power-hungry board members. People celebrated by throwing a massive pool party, and my pool, of course. As I sat back, watching kids splash around and neighbors finally enjoying themselves, I realized something. I hadn't just won a battle against the HOA. I had helped people take back their freedom, their neighborhood, and their sense of community. And as for the pool, well, it stayed right where it was, under my control, just the way it should be. As the neighborhood celebrated the fall of the HOA, I knew that my battle was finally over. The pool was mine, the ridiculous rules were gone, and the people who had spent years controlling everyone with fines and threats had lost their power. But I wasn't just going to sit back and let things return to normal. No, I had bigger plans. If the HOA had wanted to use my land for a pool, then I was going to make sure it stayed a pool, but on my terms. I expanded my little operation, adding new lounge chairs, a proper grilling station, and even a small vending area stocked with snacks and drinks. What had started as an act of revenge had turned into something much bigger. My land had become the heart of the neighborhood, and people were loving it. With no HOA to boss people around, residents started taking charge of their own community. People who had been too scared to speak up before now felt free to enjoy their homes without fear of fines. Gardens popped up in front yards, kids started riding bikes on sidewalks again, and for the first time in years, the neighborhood actually felt like a place where people wanted to live. The absence of the HOA wasn't just a victory for me. It was a victory for everyone. Without their pointless rules, people actually started working together instead of against each other. I even let some of my neighbors use parts of my land for a community garden, something the HOA would have never allowed. The funny thing was, the HOA had always claimed that their rules were necessary to keep the neighborhood looking perfect, but the second they were gone, everything actually improved. People took better care of their homes because they wanted to, not because they were afraid of getting fined. The ridiculous restrictions on paint colors, decorations, and even the height of fences were gone. And yet, the neighborhood looked better than ever. It turned out that when you let people live in peace, They actually take pride in their surroundings. I knew Nancy wasn't handling her defeat well. After she had been forced to resign, she disappeared for a while, but she wasn't the type to give up completely. I had a feeling she was still trying to figure out a way to get back at me. Sure enough, one morning, I received an official-looking letter in the mail. It was from a lawyer representing a concerned group of residents who wanted to take legal action against me for running an unauthorized recreational facility in a residential zone. I laughed when I saw it. Nancy was behind this, no doubt. It was a weak attempt to make trouble, but I wasn't worried. I had already checked the laws, and everything I was doing was perfectly legal. I wasn't running a business. I was simply allowing people to use my private property under my own terms. If they wanted to take it to court, they would lose, just like the HOA had lost. Still, I wasn't about to let Nancy think she had the upper hand. I decided to play along. I contacted the lawyer and told him that if Nancy and her so-called concerned residents wanted to go to court, they would have to explain why they had built an entire swimming pool on land they didn't own. That shut things down pretty quickly. Within a week, the lawyer dropped the case and I never heard about it again. Nancy must have realized that she was fighting a battle she couldn't win. With the HOA completely out of the picture, my pool became more popular than ever. People from neighboring communities started hearing about it, and before I knew it, I had families from outside the neighborhood asking if they could join. I wasn't sure about letting outsiders in at first, but then I realized something. The HOA had spent years keeping people out, making strict rules about who could do what. Maybe it was time to do the opposite. So, I opened my pool to anyone who wanted to join, as long as they respected the space and followed my simple rules. No HOA nonsense, no unnecessary restrictions, just common sense and good manners. At first, some of the old HOA loyalists complained, saying that allowing outsiders would ruin the neighborhood. But their arguments fell flat. The truth was, people were happier than ever. They weren't being controlled by pointless rules anymore, and they actually liked seeing new faces. Some families even made new friends, something that had been impossible under the HOA's strict, isolated rule. As time went on, I found myself enjoying this unexpected new chapter in my life. Running the pool had given me a sense of purpose, something I hadn't even realized I needed. What had started as a simple act of defiance had turned into something bigger, a community space that actually brought people together. And the best part? I was the one in charge, not some overreaching HOA board. Then, one evening, I got a surprise visitor. A city official showed up at my door, looking uneasy. He told me that he had been sent to inform me that some members of the former HOA board were petitioning to reinstate the HOA under a new name, with new leadership. Apparently, they had convinced a handful of residents that without the HOA, the neighborhood would fall apart. I smirked and asked him how many signatures they had collected. He hesitated before answering. Only a few. That was all I needed to hear. I thanked him for the information and immediately got to work. If Nancy and her old crew thought they could sneak back into power, they had another thing coming. I printed out flyers and went door to door, reminding people what life had been like under the HOA. I told them about the fines, the harassment, the ridiculous rules. And I reminded them who had stolen their money to build a pool they had no right to control. It didn't take long for people to see through the HOA's lies. When the day came for the official vote to bring back the HOA, it was an absolute disaster for Nancy. Almost nobody showed up to support it. The few who did were drowned out by the overwhelming number of residents who wanted nothing to do with it. The vote failed miserably, and with it, any hope of the HOA returning. Nancy was done, and this time, there was no coming back. As I stood by my pool that evening, watching the sunset reflect off the water, I took a deep breath and smiled. It was over. The HOA was dead for good, and the neighborhood was finally free. What had started as a fight over stolen land had turned into something much bigger, a victory for everyone who had ever been bullied by people like Nancy. My pool had become more than just a pool. It was a symbol of what could happen when people stood up for themselves and refused to be controlled. I leaned back in my chair, listening to the laughter of kids playing in the water, the sound of neighbors chatting and enjoying their evening. The HOA had tried to take my land, but in the end, I had taken something far more valuable from them, their power. And as I sipped my drink, Watching the stars begin to appear in the sky, I knew one thing for sure. This was only the beginning.